This is the 5-minute guide to the Gangut class battleships of the Imperial Russian Navy. The Gangut class was the first class of Russian dreadnought battleship and developed the general layout that would be used in all subsequent Russian battleship classes that were actually built. After the defeat at Tsushima, the Russian Navy needed new ships, but confusion and politics meant they had no idea what they wanted until it was clear that the launch of HMS Dreadnought meant it was back to the drawing board again. After rejecting a design bid from Britain due to existing issues with the shipyard, and then buying and shelving another design from an international competition due to political tension between France and Germany, the contracts were finally awarded to a local shipbuilder who immediately went to a British company for help developing the hull shape and engines. Their design followed a protracted course, which meant they were initially designed at the start of the second generation of dreadnoughts, but not completed until well into the second generation of super dreadnoughts. Initially 4 ships were ordered in 1909, Gangut, Petropavlovsk, Sevastopol and Poltava, but then immediately delayed as the Duma, the Russian parliament, refused to fund them until 1911. Another argument immediately erupted over the type of boilers to use. Older and larger low-pressure boilers were easier to maintain, but could not deliver the needed speed. The newer high-pressure boilers could give the needed power, but were maintenance-intensive. To solve this problem, the Naval General Staff simply packed a board with people in favor of the newer technology, and then held a rigged vote to get it over and done with. At 23,000 tons displacements, and with an absolute top speed of 24 knots, they completed overweight, but retained a respectable in-service speed. They eventually entered service starting in December 1914, but final work on details like the main battery meant they were not truly ready for service until mid-1915. The ships carried 12 guns of 12-inch caliber in 4 triple turrets. Because they believed that broadside firepower was more important than end-on firepower, as well as the importance of keeping the ship's center of balance low, in order to account for operations where lots of ice might build up on the upper portions of the ship, the turrets were laid out in a long line instead of super firing. Whilst this also dispersed the magazines, it meant they were everywhere, including in the middle of the machinery, and the whole upper deck was subject to blast effects, forcing the secondary battery of 16 4.7-inch guns to be mounted in the hull instead of on the main deck, limiting their use in high seas as well as their arc of fire. 1 lone anti-aircraft gun and 4 torpedo tubes completed the ship's armament. However, the main belt was only 8.9 inches thick, much less than other dreadnought battleships and thinner than even some contemporary battle cruisers. They also lacked any real torpedo protection. The idea behind the belt layout was to cover the widest possible area, with armored bulkheads some way behind the belt, whose function was less to resist incoming shells, but to initiate the fuse. The detonation fragments and shockwave would in theory be contained by the bulkheads. In theory, this allowed a much greater area of the ship to be protected. In practice, any significant sized shell with decent armor penetration would have gone clean through both parts of the protection before going off, although it did provide excellent protection against high explosive shells. In World War I, the ships served in the Baltic Fleet, but the German fleet never tried to force their way in, so the most exciting thing they did was occasionally running aground whilst escorting mining operations, and a minor mutiny that broke out on 1st November 1916 on board the Gangut, when the executive officer refused to feed the crew the traditional meal of meat and macaroni. After coaling, on the 16th of March 1917, the ships all joined the general mutiny that was part of the communist revolution. After the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, they left their base at Helsinki for Kronstadt in what became known as the Ice Voyage, since the sea was still largely frozen. Lack of manpower put all but the Petropavlovsk out of action, and this ship took part in shore bombardment against the White Russian forces. Poltava was damaged by fire in 1919, and after a rebellion against the communists in 1921, the Sevastopol and Petropavlovsk were renamed Parizhskaya, Kommuna and Marat respectively. The 2 undamaged ships were recommissioned in 1925-26, and all the ships were given proper revolutionary names. Poltava was renamed Frunze and repairs were attempted, but money ran out before she was even half completed, and she was finally abandoned in 1935 when all work was stopped and she was used as a barracks hulk while she was stripped for parts. After the German invasion she was towed to Kronstadt and run aground in late July 1941 near the Leningrad Sea Canal and used as a base for small ships before being towed to Leningrad and scrapped in 1949. Parizhskaya Kommuna was refitted in 1928 to improve her seakeeping ability. However, whilst traveling through the Bay of Biscay, she was caught in a heavy storm that damaged the bow, and she was forced to put into Brest for repairs. Marat was the first of the class to be reconstructed between 1928 and 1931. Her superstructure was enlarged, her guns were replaced, the turrets overhauled, the anti-aircraft armament augmented, and the fire control equipment modernized. Her boilers were converted to burn oil and this produced enough steam that the forward 3 boilers could be removed, and the freed space turned into anti-aircraft magazines and control spaces. Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya was the next ship to rebuild between 1931 and 1934. Her old boilers were replaced by oil-fired boilers originally intended for the Borodino-class battlecruiser Ismail. The space saved was used to improve her underwater protection. Parizhskaya Kommuna began reconstruction in 1933 similar to her sisters with some differences such as her guns and turrets being improved to increase their rate of fire and extend their range. She was also the first ship of the class to receive light anti-aircraft guns. She completed these alterations in 1938, but was returned to the dockyard from December 1939 through July 1940 to receive a new armored deck and anti-torpedo bulges which cured her stability problems and greatly increased her underwater protection at a modest cost in speed. In the winter war against Finland the ship's duties were limited to a bombardment of Finnish coastal artillery in December 1939 at Sarenpää in the Berezovsky Islands before the Gulf of Finland iced over. They failed to inflict any permanent damage before being driven off by near misses. When the Germans attacked in World War II the ships were forced to fall back to Kronstadt by the speed of the German advance, where they fired on troops of the German 18th Army from positions near Kronstadt and Leningrad. Marat was lightly damaged by German 5.9-inch guns and then had her front blown off by 2 bomb hits that detonated her forward magazine. She sank in shallow water, but was raised and used as a floating artillery battery for the rest of the war using 2, and later, 3 of her gun turrets. Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya was badly damaged on the 21st September 1941 by 3 bomb hits that knocked out 2 of her turrets. She was sent for repairs, although she was hit by more bombs on 2 different occasions while under repair, which meant she wasn't back at sea until November 1942, at which point she returned to her mission of providing fire support during the siege of Leningrad and subsequent offensives. She was the last Soviet battleship to fire shots in anger on 9 June 1944. Parizhskaya Kommuna she bombarded German and Romanian troops south of Sevastopol and spent most of her time supporting troops during the Kerch offensive in January to March 1942. She fired her last shots of the war in March 1942 before returning to port to have her worn-out 12-inch guns relined. By the time this was finished the Soviets were unwilling to expose such a prominent ship to German air attacks, which had already sunk a number of cruisers and destroyers. She returned to her original name on the 31st of May 1943, but remained in Poti until late 1944, when she led the surviving major units of the Black Sea Fleet back to Sevastopol on the 5th of November. Sevastopol and Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya remained on the active list after the end of the war, although little is known of their activities. Both were reclassified as school battleships on the 24th of July 1954 and stricken on the 17th of February 1956. Their scrapping began that same year, although Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya's hulk was still in existence in May 1958. After the war there were several plans, Project 27, to reconstruct Petropavlovsk, as she was now known, using the bow of Frunze, and moving her 3rd turret to the forward position, but they were not accepted, and were formally cancelled on the 29th of June 1948. She was renamed Volkhov after the nearby river on the 28th of November 1950 and served as a stationary training ship until stricken on the 4th of September 1953 and broken up afterwards. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a Kommuna favorite ship, let us know below and we will add it to the list.